sacred stones, some that claim to mark the center of the universe. The sacred black stone of the Manchu dynasty of the Chinese in Mukden is the center of the universe, according to old Chinese superstitions, and added venerably comes to Mukden from the graves of the emperors nearby. The Du Ring in Lhasa, Tibet, is another center of the universe, which, according to Tibetan priests, is shaped exactly like the shoulder blade of a sheep. All distances are measured from it, and it is very sacred. Another center is the Kaaba in Mecca, a dirty black stone let into the wall of the most sacred mosque and polished every year by the lips of thousands of worshippers. The Arabic word for stone, hagar, appears in scriptural writings as a proper name. The Mecca pilgrimage is a Hajj, and those who have taken it are known as Haji. Even so sane a people as the ancient Greeks came pretty near worshipping a stone, the Omphalos, or center of the earth, at Delphi. The Romans set up a stone of great consequence in Rome, but for purposes of measurement, not worship, and so the London stone of today is used. Now, Greenwich Mean Time, and that prior to the Greenwich Time calendar, the calendar was set in Giza. It's always been based on these stones, and it's incredibly important to think about, and it's interesting why. And what and why the rings of Atlantis, the original temple in the center of Atlantis, the center of Earth, the center of the world, the center of Atlantis, was also a black stone, a lodestone, and it was called the first king of Atlantis. Now, these lodestones are magnetic stones. They create magnetic fields, strong magnetic fields, and the capstone of the pyramid of Giza, that said when replaced will kick off a golden age, was also a lodestone, magnetic stone. And perhaps Giza, I'm sure it serves many, many purposes, but one of them perhaps being an amplifier of the magnetic stone placed atop. But yeah, so you can still, perfect. Okay, we're going to hop around here. This is a post I made that'll be in the description, kind of just sharing some examples of how this worldwide religion of sorts. Now, these stones were assigned deities, they were gods. And Julian Jaynes, one of my favorite authors, has an interesting theory about stone worship. And he correlates it to some kind of event that the analog eye, or the self eye, the conscious mind, in fact, didn't exist until something happened. And before that, there was no inner dialogue. The gods and priests were speaking in a schizophrenic way to an inner voice, and they were getting actual direction from an inner voice. And you could relate this kind of to the concept of Babylon and the scattering of races and the creation of different languages, right? Because there was no language. It was an internal kind of psychic deliverance. And that he says the Benben stone, the worship of the magnetic stone, came after this age when people were looking for the voice. They couldn't find the voice of God anymore. And these magnetic stones spoke. And they provided them with instruction. Build here, wander here, go there. Yeah, it's incredibly interesting. And these stones pop up all over the world and are worshipped by these people as living entities, as gods, the voice of God. And, the voice of God technology that exists today that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, is very much relying on these magnetic currents and how they're manipulated. It's very similar to these lodestones. And telluric currents and all these things are related to this. But I'm just going to read a few of these examples here. This image here, let's see if I can hop out and just make this bigger. That doesn't help any. This symbol here, the benben or omphalos stone, is the central piece of worship in many cultures. Above is the benben of God, Amun. Below is the benben of Byblos, placed inside the temple. So this one right here is the benben god of Amun, and then this one below it is the benben god of Byblos, placed inside the temple, deemed the seed of life. Now remember that, because we're going to read an article from the 1700s in America where they describe magnetism, the lodestone, and what that means as far as consciousness. At least in the 1700s, what they thought it meant. Was the stone part of a comet that had seeded life on Earth? Was it the contents of the Ark of the Covenant? Very interesting ideas. Zozer's step pyramid was the first resurrection machine to be built by the ancient Egyptians. It expressed the belief that mankind's mission in life was to transform himself, which would warrant access to the afterlife, the abode of Osiris, beyond creation and beyond the physical universe. The bottom here, depictions of two benben omphalos stones. In Egypt, the benben stone was deemed to be pointed and placed in relation to the deceased. Now, this is very interesting because it correlates not only with the obelisk, but with the pagoda as well. The symbology is very much a part of this as well, and had to do with the deceased. Trees were planted, and they also represented the same kind of symbology. Now, was the tree of life speaking to the original inhabitants of Earth? Don't know, but the symbology said so. In Greece, the benben stone was named the omphalos, phallic worship, and Om, the energetic vibratory relation of the word Om, as well as the electrical conduit representation of Om, as well as the omphalos, the phallus worship. Incredibly interesting, right? The phallus stone, the penis itself and phallic worship, right? It's just the iron rod, cathode and anode, impregnation of material and electrical matter. It's very interesting. Again, the correlations here run very deep, but they are endless. In many traditions, including the Book of Revelation, the Shittiah stone was said to be white, as was the sacred black stone at Mecca, before the kisses of the faithful supposedly turned it black. But the whiteness of this stone has to be doubted, because the term being used in Revelations is lukos, which can also mean brilliance, and so the reverence to whiteness probably referred to the stone shining, the shining one. Again, the single eye in the capstone symbology, the terms here have a lot of overlay. But the stone did not physically shine. This was simply a reference to the Shittiah being a sunstone, just as the omphalos and the benben were sunstones. Again, the sunstone, the prevalence of the sunstone, the falling of the vapor canopy, the loss of the giant trees, right? The stars and the moon and the sun didn't exist for many ages and appeared after some kind of event. Probably the fall of this inner dialogue and the exposure and creation of not only the analog eye, but the subconscious mind. But since the Shittiah was said to have been the foundation stone in the Temple of Jerusalem, and these various sacred stones all seem rather similar, it does seem possible that a sunstone of some nature may have once resided in the Jerusalem temple. Jesus Ias being an Egyptian prince and king in exile, was an heir to these same great and ancient traditions, which included the veneration of the Ben-Ben-Umphalis stone. This is why Simon Boethus, the father of Mary Magdalene, was called Shita in the Talmud, a reference that firmly links the veneration of the sacred Shitya Ben-Ben-Umphalis sunstones with the family of Jesus and with the temple. Now at the bottom here, a figure, right? This is the Umphalis of Delphi, a 4th century BC copy of the original. Compare this stone to the Umphalis of Ireland in the next chapter. I don't have this chapter in this little thread I made, but they look very similar. The Italian one is a little, the Irish one is a little taller. But the many authors over time had correlated these rings with magnetic fields. These rings that are wrapping around and going in all directions as magnetic fields. Beatlas, I might be pronouncing that wrong. Beatlas, which again, when you look into the Egyptian mythology, the beetle, the scarab, has a very similar root with this word. It's Semitic for El, Bet El, house of God. Now we talked about the God relation and the beetle being symbolic of the human existence here in the realm of God, are sacred stones that were supposedly endowed with life or gave access to a deity. Both are important to remember there. According to ancient sources, at least some of these objects of worship were meteorites, which were dedicated to the gods or revered as symbols of gods themselves. Now the description of this coin here is the Emesa temple to the sun god El Gabalis, with Betel at the center, a Roman coin from the 3rd century. Other accounts suggest that contact with them could give access to emphatic experiences of the deity. The betel has been described by Wendy Dodger as the parent form for altars and iconic statuary. Yes, idol worship began in this time frame, right? Some of these stones, statues, and the worship of statues comes from this same cult imagery, idol worship. In general, the betel was believed to have something inherent in its own nature that made it sacred, rather than becoming sacred by human intervention, such as carving it into a cult image, stone worship, statue worship. Some betels were left in their natural state, but others were worked on by sculptors. Exactly. The exact definition of a betel, as opposed to other types of sacred stones, cult stones, and so on, is rather vague both in ancient and modern sources. In some contexts, especially relating to the Nabatean sites like Petra, the term is commonly used for shaped and carved stelae. They had a role in most regions of the ancient Near East and Greek and Roman religion, as well as other cultures. Yes, and it was strongly prominent in Etruscan religion as well, which is where the Romans got a lot of their symbology from. So yeah, house of God, right? The stone contained God or deities of some kind. We're going to read the coronation chair and how that relates next, but really quick, I wanted to share this article here. This is from 1816. It is certainly a wonderful fact that it has never been conducively decided whether ghosts do or do not exist. Their existence can only be proved by positive evidence, and that is most to be relied on, and we actually have the positive testimony of thousands of credible witnesses and in favor of their existence, but not understanding so much positive testimony is considered superstitious and unphilosophical to believe that such things do or can exist. The aesthetical spirit of modern times would take us to believe that spirit cannot exist independent of matter, that spirit or mind, again, remember what I was saying about the dualistic sides of the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. Spirit or mind is merely the effect of organized matter. Matter, maya, mother, Maya, illusion, the physical world being a creation of the subconscious mind. They say that as the combination and arrangement of matter which constitutes the lodestone produces magnetism, and as that arrangement of matter which constitutes the volcanic pile produces galvanism, so does that arrangement of matter which constitutes the brain produces mentality or intellect or soul. So this writer in the early 1800s is showing the relation of matter being organized and producing magnetism, the lodestone as such, and you saw that in the Omphalos stone and all these other stones that were worshipped, as well as the galvanism involved, right? The volcanic pile, and this ties nicely into Vulcan worship and the worship of the volcano. The magma, the iron blood of Earth. But yeah, so really important there. So does that arrangement of matter which constitutes the brain produces mentality or intellect or soul. Such is the opinion of modern physiologists who include the agency and even deny the existence of the eternal spirit and attribute all the phenomenon of nature to the operation of the laws of matter. The illusionary world, right? The belief of the existence of ghosts or disembodied spirits is evidently incompatible. So this ties the ghosts and spirits. This ties nicely in with what I was saying originally and why the lodestone constitutes intellect or soul, and why they're making the relation between the belief of the existence of ghosts or disembodied spirits. These were the deities that lived in the stone, the talking stones. And the correlation I made between perhaps the fall of Babel and the tower and mentality and the getting instructions from a singular God, that when that event happened and the conscious mind became conscious and humans were capable of having a conscious mind and an inner dialogue and inner analog self, to which, that voice in your head that you have a conversation with regularly every day, all day long. Maybe not all day long, but this kind of dualistic nature of consciousness, and they're postulating its correlation to the magnetic stone or the lodestone, and why they relate it to mentality or intellect or soul, and also the concept of ghosts and disembodied spirits. The positive testimony of thousands yields to the authority of the wild and certain speculations of an atheistical philosopher. It is remarkable that no systematic effort has ever been made to accumulate such evidence of the existence of ghosts as might be relied on. It may be said that the establishment of such a belief would be injurious to society by creating unnecessary fear and anxieties, but on the other hand, it appears to me that it would prove what has never yet been proved, that the soul is immortal. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just that I could probably read this like 10 times and, not even touch the surface of what we could uncover and talk about in this article, but that the soul is immortal. Much has been written in order to prove this great fact, but there is not a conclusive argument in favor of immortality of the soul upon record. But revelation alone could we ever know that the soul is immortal. But if I apologize, this is the older the articles get, the worse they can be to read. But if the something could be established satisfactorily that the spirits of men are seen after they are deceased from the body, if it is rendered certain that spirit can and do exist independent of matter, even the philosopher would then admit that spirit is immortal because it could not be destroyed or in any manner affected by the operations of matter, and because it would be irrational to conjecture that spirit possesses an inherent tendency to dissolution. Now, it's just like the concept that nothing dies, it just transmutes itself into some other energy form. And the spirit, I would say, definitely is a perfect example of that. And the Egyptians had been saying this, as I mentioned earlier in this video. Their representations of the purpose of life and the resurrection machine that is the pyramid. It's a very interesting concept. Again, the capstone being reunited and bringing the device back into function. If instead of conclusive arguments in favor of the existence of the soul independent of the body, and if its immortality, the pious authors have filled their pages with evidence of undeniable and uncontroversible fact, their labors had not been in vain. Let mankind be convinced of the existence of a single ghost, and it is impossible for them to, again, the Holy Ghost, right? Think about it, right? The analog eye, the Holy Ghost. Very interesting overlaps here. Where was I? Let mankind can be confused. Okay. And it is improbable for them to deny that spirit is distinct from and independent of matter. Absolutely. The Egyptians' stories of the sleep state and the soul leaving the body while the body rests. I mean, there are so many strong correlations to this. That the operations of matter cannot affect its existence, that it possesses no inherent property of dissolution, and consequently that it is mortal, that it is immortal. Since it is evident that an inquiry into the existence of ghosts is so immensely important, it is truly wonderful that the subject has scarcely ever undergone serious investigation. I believe the existence of ghosts can be proved incontrovertibly, and I believe that the proof of that single fact is alone sufficient to overturn all the theories and wild hypotheses of infidel philosophy. So yeah, so much to say there. And obviously the concept of disembodied spirits and ghosts and reincarnated, that's a story as old as time. But the correlations there between the sacred stone, the lodestone, intellect, mentality, and the soul being related to not only that, but magnetism and their relations to ghosts and disembodied spirits, as well as the fact that these magnetic stones or lodestones were said to inhabit gods, and they were worshipped as such. Now, the first king of Atlantis was a stone, and the rings correlate to the magnetism of the stone. You can think of this as the Rupus Negra and our firmament, and it being at the center of the disk, and however you think of Earth, its shape and creation, but the relation is important.